And so I am wondering, have you done any research to see, are juror attitudes changing, or is the jury pool changing at all during this time?
Yeah, we've actually been digging into this quite a bit, and I'm going to forgive me if I look like I'm navigating. I made some bullet points because I'll just share a couple of things here.
Okay.
We've surveyed about 1,500 jurors, and we've asked very specific questions about COVID-19, about trial options, because of course we're all wondering about in-person trials versus Zoom trials versus some form of virtual trial. And there's a lot of organizations looking into that and courts studying it. So just a couple of initial notes. 3 out of 4 jurors report being nervous or somewhat nervous to respond to jury duty. 30% know someone who has COVID-19 or had it. 17% know someone who was seriously ill or died.
Wow.
Now, how about this? I'll give you just a couple of data points and you'll see where I'm headed right away. We asked people if a court said it would exclude people over 65, which I've seen people talking about, or it would exclude people who have underlying health conditions like heart problems, lungs, or diabetes. Do you have that, and would you ask to be excluded? We found that at least 20% of all jurors would ask to be excluded, and I think a court would almost certainly have to exclude in good conscience. We found that 46% of jurors, almost half, said they would actively seek to avoid jury duty. 30% would specifically ask to be excluded because they're uncomfortable in closed spaces. Another 9% said they would ask to be excluded because they'd refuse to wear a mask.
Interesting.
So if you put those numbers together, you got 1 in 5 that are probably going to get excluded for health reasons or age. You got 30% that are saying, I will actively ask to leave because I don't want to be in a closed space. You got another 10% basically who say, I'm going to ask to leave because I refuse to wear a mask because it violates my constitutional rights. Just that tells us that to seat a jury, we probably need to expect to lose 50%. We need a melt of 50% of jurors before we ask a single voir dire question that isn't about COVID. To me,
Okay,
that raises some real implications.
I've got a follow-up. Do you have any information yet as to, okay, so we're going to have a less representative jury pool then? If either the judge is going to force people there that don't want to be there, who are mad about it and feel scared, or we've got a less representative jury pool because we've got a large percentage off. Are you finding about whether any of those people would tend to skew one way or another?
Yes. So as far as skew goes, there's a couple of data points. So one is that jurors who say, we asked jurors, are you nervous? And as I mentioned, most of them are. The ones who say, I'm not nervous at all about jury duty in the COVID-19 era, skew heavily defense. So the people who are most likely to show up, who say, I have no qualms about showing up and I won't ask to get out because I'm not nervous. They skew defense. In the studies we looked at, I think it was about 15% on liability, which isn't nothing, right? You take a 50-50 case and you make it a 65% win rate for the defendant, 35% for the plaintiff. That's a big move.
Yeah.
The other we saw was that the jurors who say that they know someone who's been seriously harmed by COVID go the other way. There's about 17% of jurors who say, I know someone who was seriously harmed or at least seriously ill or died of COVID. Those jurors go the plaintiff's way about 11% more often. So you've got these sort of push and pull tides. The question none of us quite know is who will actually show up and who will the court exclude. But I think if I had to handicap it right now, I would tell you that in average cases, I think it's skewing defense. And the jury already skewed, in my view, slightly defense based on some studies we've done about burden of proof, non-economic damages, attitudes. I think it's going to skew a little more. And I think the next risk is if the court doesn't then allow real voir dire on top of that, because they've already used so much time on COVID and they're worried about busting the panel. I can imagine judges saying, God, we just lost half our jurors. We got to seat a jury. We're not going to lose too many more for exclusion. Then I really think you have concerns because academic research I've done says that in the absence of meaningful voir dire and meaningful exclusion, there's enough prevalence of juror bias that you're going to struggle to seat jurors who are listening to the evidence.
And how about the people that absolutely think it's a violation of their constitutional rights to wear a mask? They're not going to wear a mask. They don't, I guess they just don't believe that there is a health risk. How do those jurors skew?
Well, so this gets very strange. Overall, across cases, the early data is that they skew defense. But with a caveat. I'll give you an interesting caveat. We took 2 medical malpractice cases that we had run in the past. These are medical malpractice cases that we'd studied that were fully detailed, full cases ready for trial that we'd studied for private attorneys. So we had exact win rates and exact damages. And what we did was we ran them in May. We just ran them again. We didn't change them at all. So the only reason they would change is if something in the air changed. And that was a little before most of the protests. So most of what was in the air was the COVID-19 effect. And we wanted to see in medical malpractice cases what happened. And what was interesting is that if you just looked at the win rate, the cases didn't seem to change much. So we didn't see a skew for the defense or the plaintiff, even though many people had predicted a skew for the defense because people loved doctors and were clapping. Right. But then we try to figure out why. Why is it we're seeing high numbers of people say they respect doctors, something like 60% saying they think doctors are heroes. But we're not seeing a decline in medical malpractice liability. And we figured it out. I mean, one of the things, and this is sort of a long way to get to your question about what about some of these people who have very strong views on, for example, civil liberties. We found that Trump supporters in one of our medical malpractice cases, people who openly said they would vote for Trump again and supported him now, were better for the plaintiff than for the defense. In fact, they were driving the win rate up enough that even though the other jurors were falling off, they were keeping the overall win rate about like it was before. Now, I can tell you, you asked me about predictors. We have never run a medical malpractice case in which Trump supporters were good for the plaintiff. Never. So to see that happen, we were trying to figure out why. And I can tell you, if you ever saw that picture in the news of Trump supporters protesting the right to be out and not wear masks, and I don't, not just Trump supporters, but many of them openly Trump supporters, many of them libertarian and very conservative. And they were, driving down streets saying, we have a right to be out, we shouldn't be confined. Who stepped in front of the car? Well, the protesters who stepped in front of the car, and sometimes they weren't just protesters, were often dressed in scrubs. Yeah. They were dressed as doctors. And when you think about that image, something has happened where Trump supporters some of them have a sort of resistance to doctors and a resistance to this idea that doctors are so helpful. And incredibly, that's making them more amenable to medical malpractice cases. So we're seeing some really unusual upside down sort of effects in MedMal. If you put MedMal aside, then I would tell you, I think it's skewing slightly defense in who will show up for jury duty. But if you actually look at how they vote, we're not seeing pronounced effects.